Captain Riley Morgan adjusted the straps of her tactical vest as she crouched behind a thick cluster of jungle foliage. The humid air clung to her skin, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Her unit had been trekking for hours, moving silently through enemy territory in a dense, uncharted jungle. Every rustle of the underbrush, every distant bird call, sent shivers down her spine, not out of fear, but anticipation. She knew the enemy was near, perhaps even watching, waiting for the slightest mistake. 2 clicks ahead. The comm hub should be on that ridge, she whispered into her radio. Her voice was calm, but inside her mind raced. The mission was simple in theory: infiltrate, gather intel, disable communications, and extract. But as always, the devil lay in the details. They were deep in hostile territory, no reinforcements within hours of a call, and failure was not an option. Her team moved like shadows. Sergeant Malik, her second-in-command, signaled silently to check the perimeter, while Corporal Vega covered the rear. Riley's eyes scanned the canopy above and the thick undergrowth below. Every sense was on high alert. The jungle had a rhythm, and anything that disrupted it, an unnatural silence, a broken branch, the glint of metal, could be deadly. Suddenly, a faint click echoed somewhere to her right. Riley froze. She raised her hand, signaling the team to halt. Seconds passed, stretching into what felt like an eternity. A rustle in the bushes, then bang! The ambush hit with brutal precision. Explosions shattered the quiet, sending plumes of dirt and debris into the humid air. Riley instinctively dove to the side, rolling behind a fallen tree trunk for cover. Bullets zipped past her, thudding into the ground and trees, shredding leaves around her. The enemy had been lying in wait, more prepared than anyone had anticipated. "Riley, they're everywhere!" Malik shouted through the radio, his voice tense, panicked. "Hold position," she barked back, her mind calculating every possibility in milliseconds. But even as she scanned the battlefield, the horrifying truth became clear. Their team had been completely surrounded. Riley saw Vega go down in the chaos, grappling with an enemy soldier before being dragged into the shadows. Another team member shouted, then went silent. Riley's heart clenched, not with fear, but determination. She couldn't afford to panic. Survival meant thinking, adapting, and acting, and there was only one choice. She had to keep moving. Amidst the gunfire and explosions, Riley ducked low, moving from tree to tree with practiced precision. The enemy forces were relentless, advancing in coordinated waves, cutting off retreat paths and forcing her deeper into the jungle. Her instincts screamed that she needed to find cover and reassess. Hours passed, though time felt distorted by adrenaline and fear. The once clear mission path had become a labyrinth of vines, rocks, and deadly traps. Riley stumbled upon a small stream and paused, drinking cautiously, alert to every snap of a twig. The enemy's presence was palpable. She could feel eyes tracking her movements, hear their radios crackling in the distance. Alone, Riley faced a stark reality. She was separated from her team, left behind in enemy territory. But surrender was not in her nature. She had trained for this, prepared for the worst-case scenario, and knew that failure was not an option, not for her mission, not for her team. Her mind raced through possibilities. Extraction was unlikely without her team, and reinforcements were too far to reach her in time. She knew to survive, gather intelligence, and find a way to turn the tables. Every skill she had learned in years of military service would be tested in the coming hours. A rustle to her left drew her attention. Riley froze, heart pounding, every nerve screaming danger. Slowly, she raised her weapon, scanning the shadows. Out of the darkness stepped a lone enemy scout, momentarily distracted. Riley's breath was steady, her hand firm. One silent shot, and the threat was neutralized. No celebration, no hesitation, just survival. As night began to fall, the jungle took on an even more sinister tone. The darkness was absolute, punctuated only by the distant glow of enemy flares. Riley moved cautiously, hugging the shadows, aware that any noise could betray her position. She found a small hollow beneath a fallen tree to rest, using it as temporary cover. Sitting there, bruised and exhausted, Riley allowed herself a moment to reflect. The ambush had shattered our operation, her team's fate was uncertain, yet the mission was still alive in her hands. She knew that giving up would mean not only her death, but the failure of the mission that could cost countless lives. A faint smile touched her lips despite the dire circumstances. She was alone, yes, but she was far from helpless. Her mind worked feverishly, formulating a plan for the next move, calculating enemy patrol patterns, and reviewing every resource she had at her disposal. She realized that the mission had changed, and so had she. Survival would no longer be enough. She would have to fight, adapt, and become more than just a soldier. The jungle night pressed in around her, dense and suffocating, but Riley's resolve burned brighter than ever. She would navigate the dangers ahead, outsmart the enemy, and complete the mission, even if it meant becoming a one-woman army. And as the first light of dawn began to pierce the thick canopy, Riley emerged from her hiding spot, weapon ready, eyes scanning the horizon. The enemy base loomed in the distance, a reminder of the impossible odds ahead. But she was ready. Every heartbeat, every step, was a promise she would not fail. The jungle was merciless. Sunlight filtered through thick, dripping foliage, casting fragmented shadows across the uneven ground. Captain Riley Morgan moved with silent precision, every step calculated, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. Her body ached. Bruises from the ambush, cuts from thorny vines, and the weight of her gear pressing relentlessly against her shoulders. But she refused to slow down. Failure was not an option. Not now. Riley had survived worse during training, but this was different. She was completely alone, deep behind enemy lines, with no backup, no reinforcements, and no certainty of rescue. Her unit's fate was unknown, a thought that clawed at her mind. Yet she refused to dwell on it. Instead, she focused on what mattered: staying alive, gathering intelligence, and, if possible, striking back. The first challenge was navigation. Maps were partially destroyed in the ambush, and GPS devices had been damaged. Riley relied on her instincts and keen observational skills. She followed the faint trail of footprints and broken foliage that hinted at enemy movements. The jungle was dense, almost suffocating, but it provided cover, a shadowy cloak to conceal her from prying eyes. Her first encounter with danger came sooner than expected. A patrol of 4 enemy soldiers moved along a narrow ridge ahead. Riley froze behind a fallen tree, calculating her options. The soldiers were armed and alert, scanning the jungle as they walked. Any wrong move would alert them to her presence. She had to act carefully. Using a small stone, Riley created a subtle noise in the opposite direction, drawing 2 soldiers toward the sound. The other 2 remained on patrol, unaware of the trap forming. With precise aim, she disabled one patrolman silently, using a combination of her training and improvisation. The remaining soldier, startled, ran into the shadows, vanishing from sight. Riley exhaled slowly, her heart still racing. One misstep, one wrong choice, and her life would have ended there. She pressed forward, moving cautiously along a stream to mask her scent and footsteps. Water had the added benefit of replenishing her parched throat and body. But the jungle was unforgiving. Venomous snakes, biting insects, and treacherous terrain tested her endurance at every turn. Riley's mind worked constantly, evaluating risks, improvising solutions, and keeping her nerves in check. Every decision mattered. Every move could mean life or death. By midday, Riley discovered an abandoned enemy outpost. It was small, but contained valuable resources: a few cans of food, some medical supplies, and radios. She scavenged carefully, avoiding any signs of detection. As she rummaged, she intercepted a fragment of enemy communication, a snippet that suggested a major offensive was planned in the area. Her pulse quickened. This intelligence could turn the tide of the mission, but it also meant that the enemy would be more alert, more dangerous. As the sun began to set, Riley set up a temporary camp in a hollow beneath a fallen tree. She tended to minor wounds, fashioned splints for her bruised ankles, and rationed her limited supplies. The sounds of the jungle at night were relentless. Insects, distant howls, and the subtle crunch of leaves under unseen feet. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow could conceal danger. Riley's thoughts drifted to her team. She remembered Sergeant Malik's calm determination, Vega's quick reflexes, and the quiet humor that had kept morale high during training. She felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, knowing that their mission and their lives were intertwined with her actions. The loneliness was heavy, but she refused to let it crush her spirit. Night fell completely, and with it, the jungle became a living nightmare. Riley moved again, careful to avoid enemy patrols. She encountered a small river, swift and treacherous. Crossing it would be dangerous, but staying put would risk discovery. Using a fallen branch as a makeshift bridge and timing her movements with the water's currents, she crossed successfully, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Hours later, she stumbled upon an enemy supply cache, guarded lightly but with valuable intel. Riley's tactical mind raced. Instead of direct confrontation, she set a series of small traps using debris and makeshift devices to create diversions. Explosions in the distance drew enemy patrols away, giving her a chance to infiltrate the cache and retrieve maps, codes, and documents. These were critical pieces of information that could alter the mission's outcome. But the victory was not without cost. Riley had sustained minor injuries, scrapes, bruises, and a sprained wrist, but she refused to stop. She knew that survival depended not only on physical strength, but on mental resilience. She began to improvise, crafting simple weapons, setting traps, and creating signals to mark safe paths. Every obstacle she overcame strengthened her resolve, turning fear into determination. By dawn, Riley had established a pattern. She moved at night, rested during the day, and carefully studied enemy movements. Small victories built her confidence. She neutralized scouts, intercepted messages, and sabotaged a few supply lines. The enemy began to perceive her as a ghost, an invisible force striking without warning. Yet, despite these successes, Riley felt the psychological weight of isolation. The silence of the jungle, broken only by distant gunfire or animal calls, was a constant reminder of her solitude. She spoke quietly to herself, maintaining focus and sanity, reminding herself that she was not powerless. Every night she drifted into fitful sleep with one thought: I must survive. I must finish this mission. Her breakthrough came when she intercepted a crucial enemy radio transmission. The High Command was mobilizing for an offensive against Allied positions. Riley's pulse quickened. This intelligence was a game changer. But it also meant the enemy would soon tighten their grip, increasing patrols and surveillance. She had to act, and fast. Riley studied maps, terrain, and enemy positions, formulating a plan. The mission was no longer just about survival, it was about taking the fight to the enemy. The seed of her transformation had taken root. She realized that to succeed, she could no longer think as a single soldier. She had to become an unstoppable, one-woman army. The night was heavy and silent, broken only by the distant hum of enemy generators. Captain Riley Morgan crouched atop a ridge overlooking the enemy communications hub. From this vantage point, she could see guards moving in precise patterns, searchlights sweeping across the compound, and the perimeter walls lined with razor wire. Every detail mattered. Every misstep could be her last. Riley's mind raced as she formulated her plan. She had gathered enough intelligence to know the hub's weak points: a lightly guarded side entrance, a security rotation that left one sector exposed for exactly 3 minutes every hour, and a cache of explosives stored in a nearby storage shed. This was her chance. If she succeeded, she would cripple the enemy's communication network and shift the battlefield in her team's favor. Failure, however, was unthinkable. She moved silently down the ridge, every step calculated. Her breath was steady, her muscles coiled like springs, her eyes scanning for any sign of danger. The jungle was her ally, the shadows her armor. Reaching the side entrance, Riley found the path clear. With deft hands, she disabled the electronic lock using the codes she had intercepted. One door slid open and she slipped inside, blending into the darkness like a ghost. Inside, the hub was a maze of corridors and rooms, each filled with enemy soldiers engrossed in routine tasks. Riley hugged the walls, using her environment to avoid detection. Every footstep, every breath had to be measured. The first encounter came swiftly, a lone guard rounding a corner. With a swift, silent maneuver, Riley neutralized him, dragging the body into the shadows. No hesitation, no noise, only the cold efficiency of a trained soldier. She moved deeper, planting small explosives along critical communication lines. The hum of machinery was deafening in the quiet night, but Riley's focus was unshakable. Suddenly, a distant alarm blared. Someone had spotted one of her traps. The hub erupted into chaos. Riley ducked behind a console, narrowly avoiding gunfire. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain calm. She knew that hesitation now would be fatal. With remarkable precision, she created diversions, knocking over equipment to draw guards away from her path, and using smoke from a small incendiary device to mask her movements. One by one, she reached the main communications room. Inside, she found the central servers and racks of critical equipment. She planted the final explosives, setting timers for maximum disruption. Every second counted. As she worked, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here: the ambush, the isolation, the relentless jungle. She had been tested in ways few could endure, and yet here she was, poised to accomplish the mission alone. Suddenly, footsteps approached. A high-ranking officer entered the room, catching sight of her silhouette. Riley acted instantly, disarming him before he could raise an alarm. Her movements were precise, calculated, and brutal. The man collapsed silently, unconscious but alive, a tactical choice. She had no time for mercy or hesitation. The extraction point awaited. The explosives were set, the mission accomplished. Riley retraced her steps, navigating back through the chaos she had unleashed. Guards were now on high alert, and searchlights swept the corridors with deadly precision. She had to rely on stealth, cunning, and every survival skill she had honed over years of training. A narrow window opened. She slipped out of a side exit and into the jungle beyond. Enemy patrols were converging, alerted by the explosions. Riley moved like a shadow, blending with the darkness, using the terrain to her advantage. She encountered a small river, swift and treacherous. Without hesitation, she plunged in, letting the current carry her downstream, her body battered but determined. The jungle seemed alive with danger. Every rustle, every whisper of wind hinted at discovery. Riley pressed on, using improvised weapons and traps to create distractions. She had become more than a soldier. She was a force of nature, striking with precision, moving with purpose, and eluding capture against impossible odds. As dawn approached, Riley paused briefly to catch her breath atop a ridge overlooking a clearing where the enemy hub lay in ruins behind her, smoke curling into the morning sky. She allowed herself a moment to acknowledge the gravity of her achievement. Alone, behind enemy lines, she had succeeded where an entire unit might have failed. But there was no time for celebration. The enemy would not remain idle, and extraction was still a dangerous distance away. Riley continued her trek, carefully navigating through thick jungle, evading patrols, and overcoming natural obstacles. She encountered an enemy checkpoint along a narrow trail. With quick thinking, she used a fallen branch and a small incendiary device to create a controlled diversion. Guards ran toward the fire, shouting, while she slipped past unnoticed. Her mind was sharp, every decision calculated to minimize risk while maximizing her chances of survival. The physical toll was immense. Her muscles burned, her injuries throbbed, and exhaustion threatened to slow her down. Yet she refused to surrender to fatigue. The jungle was unforgiving, but Riley's will was indomitable. She had endured worse in training, and now every challenge she faced seemed to strengthen her resolve rather than weaken it. Along the way, she discovered a hidden enemy supply depot, another opportunity, another choice. Riley acted decisively, setting traps and sabotaging ammunition to further cripple enemy operations. Each act of sabotage was a psychological blow to her adversaries, reinforcing the idea that this was no ordinary soldier. They faced a one-woman army. Hours turned into a grueling night-long journey. Riley's focus never wavered. She moved with stealth and precision, surviving encounters that would have killed an unprepared soldier. By the time dawn broke, she had reached a vantage point overlooking the extraction point. From here, she could see Allied forces moving to intercept her. Relief surged briefly, but danger was not over. Enemy patrols were still active, and one mistake could undo everything. Riley signaled subtly, moving toward the extraction point with careful timing. Guards closed in from behind, but she used terrain, shadows, and her knowledge of enemy tactics to remain unseen. Every heartbeat was a countdown, every breath a measured step towards freedom. Finally, she reached a narrow clearing where Allied forces awaited. Exhausted, bruised, but triumphant, she emerged from the shadows. The extraction team could barely believe their eyes. The captain, alone, behind enemy lines, having destroyed a communications hub and gathered critical intelligence. Riley's mission was complete, but the journey had transformed her. No longer just a soldier, she had become an unstoppable force. The jungle was alive with danger. Smoke from the destroyed communications hub still curled into the dawn sky, a beacon for enemy reinforcements converging from all directions. Captain Riley Morgan crouched behind a thick cluster of ferns, surveying the extraction point several clicks ahead. Her body ached. Bruises, cuts, and exhaustion had settled into every muscle, but her mind was razor sharp. She had completed the mission. Now she had to survive long enough to escape. The first threat came from the air. Helicopters patrolled the ridges, their searchlights piercing the forest like knives. Riley flattened herself against the damp earth, letting shadows and the dense canopy shield her movements. She calculated the timing, wait until the rotors passed, then sprint to the next cover point. Every second was a gamble. A misstep now would be fatal. She moved like a shadow, slipping from tree to tree, each step deliberate and silent. The sound of distant gunfire reminded her that enemy patrols were closing in fast. Riley's mind raced through options. She could engage, but direct confrontation would guarantee casualties and slow her down. She had learned long ago that survival often demanded ingenuity over brute force. A fallen tree across a narrow ravine presented an opportunity. Riley balanced carefully, every step measured, the weight of her pack threatening to throw her off. Halfway across, a helicopter beam swept over the ravine. She froze, pressed herself against the bark, and held her breath. The beam moved past, oblivious to the figure blending perfectly with the shadows. A slow exhale, a heartbeat, and then forward again. Beyond the ravine, a small river blocked her path. The current was fierce, the water cold and unrelenting. Riley assessed the situation, wade across and risk being swept downstream, or use a fallen branch to bridge the flow. She chose the latter, balancing precariously, arms trembling under the strain. Halfway across, the branch creaked ominously.
Riley's heart leaped into her throat, but she pressed on, muscles burning, eyes fixed on the far bank. One final lunge, and she scrambled onto solid ground, dripping wet but alive. As she emerged, gunfire erupted in the distance, enemy forces reacting to the destruction of their hub. Riley ducked behind a rock formation, catching her breath. Her injuries throbbed. Every bruise and cut reminded her of the cost, but she refused to let pain slow her down. She had survived worse, and she knew that the extraction team was her lifeline. Every step forward was a step closer to safety. Hours passed as Riley navigated through thick jungle, her senses heightened to every sound, movement, and scent. Enemy patrols moved in unpredictable patterns, sometimes 2 steps ahead, sometimes lagging behind. Riley adapted constantly, using fallen trees, dense underbrush, and shadows to remain unseen. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind demanded focus. One mistake now would erase all she had accomplished. Along the way, Riley encountered a small enemy supply outpost. A decision had to be made: bypass it or sabotage it to create further distractions. She chose the latter, planting small incendiary devices and triggering a controlled explosion. Alarms screamed in the distance as soldiers scrambled to respond. Riley disappeared into the shadows, using the chaos to cover her advance. Each act reinforced the growing legend of the one-woman army moving through enemy lines, striking without warning. By late afternoon, Riley reached a ridge overlooking the extraction point. Allied forces were waiting, their vehicles partially concealed by trees. Relief surged through her, but she knew the danger was not over. Enemy forces were still nearby, and one miscalculated step could lead to disaster. She moved with precision, timing her approach to coincide with the rotation of enemy patrols. A sniper positioned on a distant ridge could spot her at any moment, so she hugged the underbrush, moving low and fast. The jungle seemed to conspire with her. Shadows fell just right, leaves muffled her steps, and the terrain provided cover as if nature itself were on her side. As she neared the extraction point, an enemy squad emerged from a concealed path, their rifles trained toward her direction. Riley acted instantly. She used a combination of tactical maneuvers and improvised weapons to neutralize them silently. A precise shot, a thrown knife, and a quick diversion later, the path was clear. She sprinted the final stretch, lungs burning, muscles screaming, adrenaline surging. At last, she reached the extraction clearing. Allied soldiers greeted her with astonishment and awe, helping her into the armored vehicle and then onto the helicopter. Riley's body sagged with exhaustion, every injury screaming in protest, but her mind remained sharp. She had completed the mission. She had survived impossible odds. She had become more than a soldier. She had become a force to be reckoned with. As the helicopter lifted off, Riley looked down at the jungle below. Smoke still rose from the destroyed communications hub, and enemy patrols scrambled in disarray. Her heart was heavy with the loss of her team, with the friends and comrades she had been forced to leave behind, but she also felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had honored their sacrifice by completing the mission that none could achieve alone. Back at base, Riley was debriefed. Commanders listened in disbelief as she recounted her actions: the ambush, the solo navigation, the sabotage, the destruction of the hub, and the countless encounters where survival hinged on split-second decisions. Recognition was swift. Awards, commendations, and accolades awaited her, but Riley's focus was elsewhere. She thought of her team, of the jungle, and of the soldier she had become. In the quiet of her quarters, Riley allowed herself a moment of reflection. Bruised, exhausted, and forever changed, she understood the transformation she had undergone. The mission had forced her to confront fear, isolation, and relentless danger, and she had emerged victorious. Alone, behind enemy lines, she had proven that one determined soldier could alter the course of a battle, even against overwhelming odds. As night fell once more, Riley stood on the base balcony, looking toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, danger still lurked, but she was ready. The jungle had tested her, the enemy had tried to break her, and she had survived every challenge. Captain Riley Morgan had become a one-woman army, a symbol of courage, resilience, and indomitable spirit.